Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you listening to this Focus Consulting Group Hit It and Quit It webinar for the next 20 minutes. Welcome all of you. Ground rules are pretty simple in that we ask you, if you're not on mute, to please go on mute so we reduce the background noise. We are recording this, so if you'd like a copy of the recording, you can go out to our YouTube channel and listen to it there, or you can contact Laura. Her contact information will be at the end of the presentation. I'm Keith Robinson. I'm the managing partner here at Focus Consulting Group, and it's my pleasure to welcome my partner, our comp and rewards practice leader. He also runs strategy, by the way, Brian Kozlowski. So welcome, Brian.
Thank you. Hello, everybody.
And we look forward today to talking about something that you may not feel the pain now, but you likely will feel it somewhere down the road, which is all about transparency and what's happening in the marketplace relative to transparency in compensation, requirements that states and cities are having of employers when they recruit and when they bring people in. So Brian is our expert in all of this. So I'm basically going to interview Brian about what's going on in the world of transparency. And we want to share with you sort of three big ideas, three things that you really want to pay attention to when you think about transparency in compensation. And more importantly, when you think about it in terms of the open marketplace. So the three big ideas is one, we want to let you know what's changing and where. Some of you may be in markets where this is a requirement, you're dealing with it already. Others may be new to this conversation and things that you have to be thinking about. And then, of course, we also want to talk about the impact it will have on attracting talent. And one that many people haven't really thought of is the impact it will have on retaining your top talent, because this is certainly something that will challenge us all when it comes to the extrinsic side of rewards, the compensation side, because the kimono is being opened and now people are going to have a much bigger window into what's going on. So we're going to talk about those three big ideas: what's changing, how it's going to impact recruiting and attracting, and how it's going to impact retaining talent. So let's just go ahead and dive right in. And we know, Brian, that the times are changing.
They sure are.
And we know that they're changing in a lot of different places, a lot of different states and cities.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about your view on transparency requirements. What are you seeing as far as the biggest challenges, and what are some of the key highlights from a lot of these different places that are actually requiring employers to now be more open and transparent?
Yeah, it's really interesting. And this started in and around COVID. So we had a lot going on at the same time. COVID, we had a lot of the social movements, the Me Too movement, Black Lives Matters. And this all kind of started this process. And where it started in a number of locales, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, started as the process of just not being able to ask candidates what their compensation is or was currently in their current roles. And obviously, all of this is getting to pay equity, and the research that's been done that there is inequities in pay across the demographics and races. So it started there. And then out of that has born the next level of process, which is the disclosure of compensation for roles. And we see it on different levels in different places. So in some states, it's just reporting, it's just posting the base salaries, the base salary ranges for a potential role that's being posted. It's there in some states, it's having the candidate be able to ask during the process. And then state of Washington has gone the furthest, and they're the most recent entrant into this game. And they are requiring that a employer post everything. So all compensation, so bonus and all benefits. So full kimono out there. So there's been kind of the stage process. And it's been interesting because there's been a lot of pushback, as you can imagine, from the companies in the locales, because many of them have not been comfortable providing this level of transparency at all. So there's the big change, and this is now happening more broadly, of opening up and being more transparent about what the opportunity that firms are recruiting for.
So Brian, certainly in our industry, as goes New York City, because many of our clients and many of the big financial firms are in New York City. As goes New York City, goes the rest of the financial community, and setting expectations about what potential employees are going to face. What are some of the big things that you're seeing in New York City that our employers are going to have to deal with? And oh, by the way, even though states haven't mandated this stuff, remember, expectations expectations or premeditated resentments. So if I'm experiencing something in New York City in the financial industry, chances are I'm going to expect that everywhere.
Yeah, so the interesting part is New York City and New York State are coming at this in somewhat of a parallel method, but they each have their own set of regulations. And I think the biggest area of uncertainty is how it really relates to remote workers. So each state has a different threshold. I think New York's is 4, the number of employees. It could be anywhere, and we see from the states anywhere between 4 and 15 employees of firms that have to opt into it. But the biggest thing is how you treat remote workers and how you think about if you're recruiting, if you're domiciled in New York, certainly have to abide. If you're recruiting for a position for a position that could be in New York City or New York State, you also have to abide by it. So we're seeing for New York City and certainly for New York State as it's following is the idea of you have to provide clarity around what the base is, and that's the range of base salary for a particular role. So that's where it's starting. Now to see, it will be interesting to see if New York follows the pattern that's now been set really by Colorado, which has gone a step further than that, and Washington, which I would say has gone 2 steps further than that in really providing greater transparency.
Yeah, that will have impacts. And again, there's always this sort of domino effect, very much of a kind of a Me Too or I'm next industry. And certainly, in the state of Illinois and Chicago and some of these other bigger geographies, we always have to be paying attention to what's going on in some of these states, especially New York State and New York City, where many of the financial firms are located. So let's actually now look at what does this mean for acquiring talent? So you mentioned remote workers, and so that certainly has changed the recruiting landscape from being one of maybe a limited geography to a much more broad geography. Many of clients, for example, say, the world is now my oyster. I can recruit all over the world because we are hybrid, we're blended, or we are frankly just not going back to the office. We're going to be a virtual or a distributed workforce. In your mind, and from your experience, what are the greatest impacts for employers when it comes to recruiting and acquiring talent with this new legislation?
Yeah, so it's been interesting from a recruiting perspective because there's been some mixed data so far on how transparency has impacted recruiting. So we have some limited data sets, but Colorado is one of the bigger ones. And this is from some Indeed data. And what they found is that it was interesting. Once they put the transparency rules in place, the number of firms recruiting for remote positions within Colorado decreased. And in fact, in some of the role positions, they actually said they are not accepting candidates from Colorado. So it's going to be that balance of how that may work today, but it's not going to work tomorrow as more of these states start to adopt it. So I think there are a couple of real key items. The first of which is getting real clear on what the value of a particular role is to an organization, and certainly setting a band that is acceptable and makes sense. So what you're now doing is you have to be more thoughtful about where you set those bands and how you're communicating them. The second, and I think the biggest piece is, and this is going to carry over to the retention piece as well, is, so many firms have a black box. And that's something, Keith, you and I hear all the time in our rewards work is, one of my big complaints about a rewards plan is it's not transparent. And firms are going to have to be more transparent about how they think about base salary, how the bonus is structured. And certainly now, if you take the Washington example, all the other rewards that come with it, whether it be the benefits, whether it be some of the intrinsic elements, those are things that would be developed over time. But now you have to be more transparent about those and upfront about those. And when you're posting jobs, at least my experience and having done it in the past, those are things you kind of think about on the go and you kind of fit in to whatever you're doing today. And then you have to be more kind of really think about it going forward. So that's certainly a key part. The positive side is, and I'm sure many of you that have recruited have experienced this, you're getting, to some extent, depending upon how you set the band, you're getting the conversation of compensation off the table. And what I mean by that is something that is in Dan Pink's book Drive, is there's always been this dance. This is what we're budgeting. We're going to ask the candidate what they make, and then we'll figure out where it is. Well, that's not what we're going to be doing anymore. We're going to be setting, hopefully, a realistic band up front. So it's going to be very clear to the candidate what the opportunity is. So you're going to be able to recruit the best people who are going to be interested in the job moving forward. And it takes out some of that balance of people being either dropping out of the process because it's not a compensation band they're interested in once they learn about it further in the process, or people who think the job, by not seeing the compensation, is below where they are. So that transparency, and it's borne out a little bit in the recruiting data that we've seen, that it'll help that process and make it more efficient.
Yeah, it really does. It's really incumbent now on employers to really think about their recruiting process, but also their selection process. In other words, once you have the candidates in the door, because remember, in some states, you have to be transparent, but the candidate does not have to be transparent. And every once in a while, their current compensation can be a leading indicator of their actual skill level and or experience level. So it's going to make the interviewing process, I think, a little bit more challenging, in that you're going to have to really get underneath the value they can bring, the skills and experience that they've had, beyond just what's on the resume, right? So it's just something that, as you start to think about acquiring talent, you're going to have to get much, much better at interviewing and selection and avoiding bias.
Yeah, and the other piece, obviously, that comes with this, which is how this all started, is thinking about the recruiting effort from and putting diversity at the forefront. And diversity comes in a lot of different shapes and sizes, but making it more active and strategic part of the process.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got them in the door. This legislation actually brings in all sorts of complications in retaining our talent too, simply because it's so much easier, as our little cartoon there on the right says, we can look on and look over at greener pastures, which, oh, by the way, we would say is a fallacy, because if you're only moving for pay, you're moving for the wrong reason. And we recognize both extrinsic and intrinsic rewards, and intrinsic rewards, by and large, are the things that really keep people. It usually shows up extrinsically. But Brian, from this legislation, what do you see as sort of the knock-on effect for retaining talent, and what are some of the key pitfalls that our clients should be thinking about?
Yeah, so it's real interesting. And there is some study done by a couple different firms about pay equity studies. And what they've found is, well, now we have a balance of somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 to 25% of all employees being in jurisdictions that are covered under some regulation, but only 17% or 20% of the largest 1,000 companies in the US have actually done anything in the pay equity study arena at all in the last couple of years. And even with those studies, what they've done with the data has been pretty straightforward and simple. So I think from the first perspective is just really thinking, where are we from a pay equity perspective with those that are in the roles that we're recruiting for, and comparing the salaries. So for me, what was interesting as I've been doing the reading on this is, one of the big concerns is on pay compression. And I raised my hand, I took a step back and said, well, hold on, pay compression, how's that be? We're going to be raising the level of knowledge for individuals. So shouldn't providing more transparency help with compression? And it's actually the opposite. There's been some studies, one done by Harvard Business School, that there are two levels of concern. The first of which is on pay compression, because firms have to report the ranges of base salaries. One of the ways they're going to compensate by doing that and having to pay up for talent in the marketplace is to hold folks in a similar role static. So it's just the balancing of the scales. So that's one level of pay compression that's under concern. The other is more of a fear factor, same pay compression, but from a fear perspective, and that managers, when they're posting jobs, are going to be so fearful that folks are going to want to negotiate, that they're going to set a range for a particular role. And if folks are already in that range, they're going to keep them there. So what that means for incumbent individuals is that there's not going to be any compensation growth. So because what they want to avoid is, they want to avoid this idea of really going against the regulation of, we provided an incorrect range. So those are two big issues that I think firms are going to have to really face. And the knockoff concern of this kind of flat compensation compression is something that we in our rewards practice preach against almost daily, is the one-offs. So an effective rewards plan is something that is equally applied to all, and can be applied to everyone in an organization, really just regardless of your role. The concern is that there's going to be this idea of, okay, I get that that's what the range is, but I'm me and I'm more valuable than that. So you Mr. Manager, Miss Manager, this is what I'm asking for, and I'd like to set up a side deal. So the problem with the side deal is, then you have 20-person team, you have 20 different compensation schemes. And obviously that's very inefficient for an organization.
Yeah, and that's a real challenge too, especially when you're looking at top talent that you want to retain, right? And we always say you've got to have that balance of extrinsic and intrinsic rewards, because the reality is you don't want somebody to hold a financial gun to your head, and recognizing that they won't do that if they're really happy in their work, if they enjoy it. Now, that means that you've got to keep pace with the market. That means that you've got to pay fairly, right? Back to our three principles, by the way, when we do this work, is it's got to be fair in the eyes of those being rewarded. It's got to be transparent, and it should be a simple design. Those are ways that you will actually retain your talent, because guess what? We all look at the market data and we all think about the market data and we churn on the market data. But the reality is, for these states in particular and these cities in particular, you have just now created the spot market, right? And we know from our work, whenever we look at creating a rewards plan, we're looking at three different types of data. We're looking at market data for sure. We're looking at spot market data, which we get from recruiters and people in the market on a daily basis, weekly basis. And then, of course, we look at our own market data that we collect over time as well, because we want to triangulate on what fair looks like. And we also want to triangulate on what value means for the position. So you'll avoid some of the complications in keeping talent if you keep your eyes on the spot market data. So be aware of who's offering what out there. Talk to these recruiters, talk to the people that are in the market every single day so you understand what that is, and make sure that you sort of meet that fair, transparent, and simple test for the extrinsic rewards. And make sure you've got a really good handle on your intrinsic rewards. How do we develop talent? How do we grow talent? How do we make sure that people are feeling like they're progressing in their career, getting training, and so on? Both are incredibly important. And this is going to make the extrinsic rewards a little bit more challenging. So Brian, I'm going to give you an extrinsic reward. I'm going to promote you to CEO.
Thank
So
you.
you're out there, you've got CEOs and you've got senior leaders listening to this, and you say, okay, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. If you're the CEO of a firm, what's the medicine that you're going to be taking? What's that ounce of prevention that you would recommend to our clients?
Yeah, I'm going to write a two-piece prescription. The first of which is pay equity studies. It's a great tool and underutilized broadly, but certainly in our industry. And that gives you the opportunity to look at, are we paying folks in the same role comparably? And remember, up until now, for many, pay has been a black box. Numbers have been a black box. But as you start to recruit for roles, the numbers are going to be out there. And it's very easy. And this goes back to my pay compression question of, well, I'm going to be able to look and see, hey, you're recruiting for the same role at the same level, and I'm $20,000 below. Why is that? So I'd rather be ahead of that than behind that curve. So being a pay equity study would shine a light on areas where you're strong, where there is that balance, areas where you're not as strong, and then develop a pathway for you to be able to correct those. So pay equity study would certainly be my number one recommendation for anybody as we enter this new regulatory environment. The second piece, and I've mentioned black box a couple of times, is a regular review of your reward plan. Keith mentioned fair, transparent, and simple. Those are our three key principles. Doing a health check every couple of years of, are we living into those principles? Where do we stand relative to the market? And again, there are other inputs, not just market data, but how do we think about rewards, and how transparent are we being to the organization? Because one of the key pieces in the data, certainly the data has borne this out, folks love transparency. They like the transparency and compensation. And in fact, they would take less money to be in a plan that's more transparent. So as you're thinking about going back to the recruiting question, really going through the process and verifying every couple of years, yes, this is what our plan is. This is what we stand for. And we are checking the boxes of fair, transparent, and simple. Folks have this idea. They understand the extrinsic and intrinsic balance. They understand what our philosophy is. And they're able to connect the dots. They're able to understand why they're getting the dollar that they're getting, and then the balance between the firm and their performance and how it all works together. And so many firms don't do that. They kind of set a rewards plan and crank it up and let it go for many years. And that's worked until now, and it's just not going to work anymore.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. So this does represent a pretty good paradigm shift for our industry, certainly when it comes to pay and when it comes to the extrinsic rewards. And we just want to make sure that our clients are out ahead of that. So I want to thank you, Brian, for your time today, and certainly for your expertise in helping with things like pay equity studies and reviews of rewards plans and so on. That, by the way, was the shameless promotion for us for Focus Consulting. And I want to offer up to all of you February 17th. Please return for our next Hit It and Quit It, where we're actually going to have a discussion about mindfulness, talk about an intrinsic reward, mindfulness being probably the most essential intrinsic reward you can give to yourself. And we're going to talk a little bit about an essential practice for investment professionals, for those of us who manage money for a living. And Jim and Robert are going to talk about that. Robert is an expert mindfulness teacher. And so he will share that information with you on how he teaches investment professionals to be more mindful. So please come and join us. If you want any additional information, you can check out our website under the Our Thoughts section, or if you would like to be on our distribution list or get white papers, please contact Laura. Thanks, everybody. Have a great weekend. We'll see you next time.
Thank you all.